Hi there, and welcome to Live Loved. I'm Amy Hirsch. I'm here with Julie Wright, and we have a bit of a racy topic to discuss with you today. So, if you do have young children, you might want to make sure that they're not within earshot, because we're going to be talking about, for the next 4 episodes, stewarding our sexuality. I think it's
Dun, dun,
appropriate
dun.
because we're in the month of February. So we're just going to go there. We're going to talk about stewarding our sexuality. And Julie, I thought it would be fun. I have some names I'm going to throw out there, and I want you to tell me what you think of when I throw these names out, okay?
Yep.
Marilyn Monroe, Farrah Fawcett, Pamela Anderson, Kim Kardashian.
Mm.
What do all these women have in common?
For those of you who couldn't see, I made they're drawn that way, right? They're curvy,
Yes.
they're sex appeal, they are sex symbols. Yeah.
Yes. So as I was thinking about this topic, I started thinking about, when are the earliest messages of sensuality and seduction and sexuality? When did that start for me as a child? And Julie, you and I grew up in the era of Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition and the
Yeah.
Victoria's Secret catalog. And it just got me thinking of all of these early messages
Mm-hmm.
of your worth being based on kind of the external beauty that these women that I just
Yeah.
mentioned
Yeah.
all had.
Yeah.
And while most of us never really experienced that level of sexual power, I
Yeah.
think we all can say we've gotten the message that in our culture, sex can mean power. And
Mm-hmm.
sex can be a tool to be used to get attention and
Mm.
affirmation, even promotion.
Yeah.
So,
And
how do we?
manipulation. I mean, there's a saying, right? Sex sells.
Yeah.
It's like women, you come into this coming of age, and as a girl, I think we start to realize like we have something. We
Mhm.
have something other people want. And learn, I mean, not to be,
Yeah.
whatever, but learning how to steward that, learning how to steward the attention, learning how to steward the pursuit, that male pursuit, and what part of this is of God and which part of it can be corrupted by sin and self.
I
You
think you
know,
put it really well in your book, Redeeming Eve When a Woman Lives Loved. This little paragraph stood out to me. You say, female sexuality is awesome and wonderful, powerful and glorious. Choosing to walk in purity and relate in protective love that respects a man's sexuality is a beautiful thing to behold. In our journey from girlhood to womanhood, what we're just talking about,
yeah.
right? We all must navigate the precarious waters of understanding, bridling, and directing the power of our sexuality.
Hmm.
So, how do we do that well, Julie?
That's the $1 million question. And we're going to take the next 4 weeks
Mhm.
and look at unpacking this topic from different angles because I don't think there's a one size fits all.
Mhm.
So I think today we'll dive into the identity portion of that, the internal, the emotional, the relational side of stewarding our sexuality. And next episode, I would like to dive into when that isn't stewarded well, we can compromise and get pulled into scenarios, situations, relationships that cross lines that are entrapping. You can get into adultery, you can get into there's a whole there's a place where that train leads.
Mhm.
When it isn't stewarded well. And then we're going to look the third episode of this series, this 4 week series. We're going to dive into pornography, media, modesty. What does all that look like? And really playing off of the story of Bathsheba, who bathed naked on a rooftop in full view of a healthy male.
Mhm.
Whose fault was that? We're going to dive into that question. What is male responsibility? What is female responsibility in those moments of sexuality? And then the last episode, I am very aware, and both Amy and I have been about this, that this is a loaded topic
Mhm.
because it's so personal. And if it has been misused, your own misuse of it, or somebody has misused their sexuality and abused you, and that's a lot of women who have experienced that this is both personal and can be potentially extremely painful. And so I just want to say on the front end here that we are going to do our best to bookend this in compassion and conviction. We don't want to lead into compromise. We are not moving into any condemnation. We want to have an honest, compassionate, redemptive conversation
Hmm.
about these topics. And so just for our listeners to know that that is our heart, that God created our sexuality. It's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's awesome, and it can be super destructive when misused. And so the last week that we're going to wrap up with this is going to be, how do we heal from sexual brokenness, from sexual misconduct, our own and others? And what is that journey to wholeness into redemption? Because this is a bumpy road for everybody. I don't think anyone just like, ta-da, here I am. And I've walked a perfect line,
Right.
with no missteps and no problems and no pain.
Mhm.
It's a complicated journey. And so we're going to do our best to give some simple guardrail points, but I also want to hold out that no matter what gets triggered in the next 3 episodes, the 4th episode, we are going to dive into the redemption, the restoration, the healing from any brokenness that we've experienced. So I'm
Amen.
looking forward to the conversation, Amy.
Yeah, buckle up. It's going to be good.
Yeah.
So let's go back to, I think today we want to focus on the subject of our identity
Mm-hmm.
and knowing who we are, because, when we buy into culture's idea of what's beautiful, um, that's when we can really get into the danger zone. And yeah, I'm just interested in what you have to say about just stewarding that. So,
Well, yeah, as we
where do you
look
want to
at
start?
identity, yeah, sure. We'll just dive into
Yeah.
identity. And we've talked a lot about identity in our episodes and throughout the book of Redeeming Eve. Each woman that we kind of explore her story, it starts with either an identity idol or solid identity on who she is to the Lord and in the Lord. And with Bathsheba, we see the potential. We don't always know her motives, so I'm not just assigning this to her, but throughout the story, we see that perhaps this idol of putting your identity in your sex appeal, that's different than just being beautiful. There's nothing wrong with beauty. We're going to talk about that more too. But in her sexuality, and more importantly, her sensuality,
Mhm.
there's a difference, I think, between our sexuality and the sensual nature of that. And she uses sensuality to seduce and to draw attention, to solicit
Mhm.
attention that wasn't hers to have. She
Yeah.
was a married woman. So I'd like to really dive into this idea of both soliciting attention or stealing affection
Mhm.
as two of the things that put together are part of seduction-based sexuality,
Okay.
which is different than pure-based sexuality. Yeah, go ahead.
So, for those of you who aren't familiar with the story of Bathsheba and King David, it is found in 2 Samuel, starting in 2 Samuel 11. I'm just going to read a little bit of the story so it gives you some context, but basically, setting it up, there was a moment where David was supposed to be away at war,
Yeah,
and he was kind of roaming his rooftop one night, and that's where the story begins.
yeah,
It says, one evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of his palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, "She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite." Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her.
Mm-hmm.
So I know in your book, you really unpack. I think in the past, I read this story and I really saw Bathsheba as someone who was just kind of almost a victim in the story. Like, the king
Sure.
sent for her and she didn't have any choice. But you really unpacked
Mm.
Bathsheba's um, just responsibility in this story. So
Yeah.
maybe we can start there.
Yeah, and curiously, this has been the area of my book almost most contended. Like, not
Really?
it wasn't submission, it's not respecting your husband, this idea that women have any personal responsibility
Mm.
because
Mm-hmm.
goes against the grain of some things. And so I never, I want people to hear this. I never blame a victim for
Right.
victimization. Sin is sin. It's not your fault if somebody sins against you.
Mhm.
However, and that's not a but that negates that, but however, we still have a responsibility in our own choices and what we do. As I was really unpacking the Bathsheba story and thinking about her on this rooftop, you know, I was sitting in my backyard. I'm writing the story. I like to write outside. I love being outside. And I'm imagining myself in the scenario. And I look up and I'm thinking, like, there's David on the rooftop noticing her. And it dawned on me that if David could see her, she could see him. This was not a private bathing situation, and David was not a peeping Tom. He did not look at her, across the city and through her window into her bathroom with binoculars. He was standing where he could see her, which meant she was laying bathing where she could see him.
Mm-hmm.
And I lived in Europe for a few years,
Yeah.
a couple years ago, and I came to understand and appreciate a city with a castle. The castle is at the highest place. The closer you are, more important you are to the king. Your house was closer to the castle. And when you sit on that castle, on any of the decks or the things, you can see down on the rooftops and patios of every person in proximity
Right.
within miles. And so in Europe, everybody takes great care that your window is a half a foot from the window of your neighbor. Like,
Yeah.
privacy is a thing that everybody is super aware of.
Mhm.
So, we don't know her motive per se in that passage, but later she alludes to her motive because a few things. We know she was not just a victim. I mean, we could talk about David still being selfish. That was super selfish. Bathsheba's father was one of David's 30 mighty men. They were friends. So that means he worked for David. Bathsheba grew up in a home where her dad worked for David and was one of his best friends. So he is they are known people to each other. They are not strangers. And plus, the person tells her, "Hey, it's Bathsheba." And he's like, "Well, she's grown up into
Mm-hmm.
something."
He knew who she
And,
was. Yep.
and Uriah the Hittite works for David as well. Her husband does. So, I mean, this is not a stranger being called and summoned and then
Mm-hmm.
raped. The Bible is not shy about calling rape rape. And in the story, Bathsheba confesses it as adultery. David confesses it as adultery. Nathan the prophet confronts it as adultery. God called it adultery. Jesus in the genealogy still refers to it as adultery. And even more, their son, their second son, we'll get into that, Solomon, later writes the strongest warnings about adultery, about seduction in the Bible. And he says he learned it from his mother's teeth. And his father taught him, this is where this leads, son. Beware, be careful. He also goes on to write the most beautiful celebration of pure marital love in scripture and arguably in literature. So there's a lot that they learn both from their mistakes and from their redemption.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So clearly, because this was identified as adultery several times, that signifies that there was mutual participation.
Yeah.
And boom, it's an example of seduction
Sure.
and how Bathsheba perhaps used her feminine wiles
Yeah.
for
Use your
personal gain,
asset.
her assets
Yeah.
for personal gain. So let me ask you, Julie, what are the ways that this translates to today? You know, what are the ways we as women can slip into this compromise of
Mhm.
using our sexuality for personal gain? And on the back end of that, how is it
Yeah.
really diminishing men's sexuality when we do that?
I'll let you answer that question. No, just that's a big one. So I think there's a few ways we can do this, and we're going to dive into some of those internal ways
Mhm.
today, looking at, this idea of soliciting attention that
Mhm.
isn't yours to have.
Mm.
As women, men may not always totally realize when this is happening, but I've talked to women around the world,
Mhm.
and we are pretty astute. We
Mm.
are pretty intuitive. So if we can just be honest and
Mm.
transparent for a moment, we know when we don't even need to be like immodestly dressed, but we might walk into a room and we are weighing male response to our beauty.
Mhm.
We came into the restaurant, who's looking at me, who noticed me? Did this person, did this person? We're walking to a boardroom, we walk into church. How are people responding to how I look today?
Mm.
And so we're going to try to navigate this idea of what is just this healthy, I carry myself with confidence, but also with purity. I look nice, I feel good. That is different than walking in and needing a response from other people, needing somebody else to respond to your sensuality or sexuality in a way that you glean your identity or affirmation from that.
Mhm.
And we know, I think, when we tilt into that or that direction, or oh, I hope they kind of respond to me better or whatever. And we certainly, as women, know when another woman walks in and is soliciting attention from
Mhm.
the men in the room.
Oh, yeah.
We know it as women. We
Mm.
sit there and we're like, oh, good grief, or we roll our eyes, or we stand up and think we have to compete with that a little, or so, depending where we're at with our own healing of this identity idol
Mm.
of thinking that our value comes from our sensuality.
Mhm.
And as you pointed out at the top of the show, Amy, that is pounded into women from the time they are young, directly and indirectly, and sometimes very directly from people, from spouses, from parents. I mean, women can get this message very strongly, indirectly or directly. And so when somebody comes in looking for that attention, and it can go from just, hey, I need attention, I need affirmation, pay attention to me, to it can slip into compromise really quick, where it's like now we are moving into a place of immodesty. Like, you know what? Please don't walk over to me and my husband and drop your pencil, have to pick it up, and now your shirt falls open. I mean, all the little things. I mean, if you watch Legally Blonde with
I
the
was
bend,
just thinking
flip,
of that.
the bend and flip,
The bend
you
and
need to,
snap.
or bend and snap, whatever it was, like women know when they are
Mhm.
letting their shirt fall open or sitting where, just we
Mhm.
know this. So if we can just be honest and admit that we know when we are using our sexuality to manipulate.
Yeah.
And what at the heart of that that sounds really strong to say, wow, we're manipulating. It is 100% selfish and it's disrespectful. It is, the Bible has this verse in Proverbs that says, the prostitute reduces you to a loaf of bread. Okay, well, I read past that because it's like, well, I'm no prostitute, that doesn't apply to me. But it's what it's talking about is the spirit of idolatry that is linked with that says a woman can reduce a man to being something that just gives her a little morsel.
Hmm.
Ah, I reduced him to somebody just to give me a compliment, a loaf of bread. Give me a little slice of affirmation. Give me a little slice of attention. And at the worst case, it goes from soliciting this attention to stealing attention or affection and connection. Because it can start out with, hey, oh, wow, everybody's noticing me, and trying to get that noticing because we've put our identity in other people noticing us to affirm our beauty, external beauty. And then we can move into those things can turn into connections where we start to steal affection. If I have a friend whose husband, we're friends, but if I start wanting that husband's affection directed my way, his attention, his affirmation, or his affection, I am stealing. I shared with you before we even started this, two of our girls grew up at the same, close in age, same time in our home. And we had a swimming pool and they're little, and this is just little sibling stuff, rivalry. But I remember being like, okay, watch me dive. And one daughter would dive and the other daughter, if we were watching that daughter, she would all of a sudden, oh, I hurt myself. And we'd look, oh, what happened? And now we missed the other girl's dive. And we started to catch on to this, that there was some intentionality in this little sibling dynamic. And we named it in our family. We said, that's stealing attention. You are not allowed to steal attention from your sister or the other sister from your sister. So when it is your sister's turn to dive, if you interrupt that moment that we are focused on your sister, you lose your turn. And you don't get the attention. And it was just such a silly thing. I mean, they're like 4 and 6 or 5 and 7 at this time. I mean, so this is not adult stealing of attention, but that phrase and that dynamic has stayed with me. And we've talked about being competitive or living based on comparison a few episodes ago when we were talking about Rachel and Leah. And if we put our identity in comparison and competition, that can lead to compromise in this area. Now, instead of being a friend to my girlfriend, I'm competing with her for the attention of her husband, or that it just sounds so terrible. But it's like, do not take what is not yours. I mean, be a woman who, stewards your sexuality with integrity, with purity. We want to be a woman that respects male sexuality. And we want to be women that honor our marriage and other people's marriage. That it's important.
And I'm just thinking about social media now and how it plays into all this, because you even say it in your book, Julie, that really social media today is the rooftop.
Yeah.
Of Bathsheba's time.
Yeah.
Now, you just look on social media and this need for attention and affirmation manifests in dozens of ways, starting at a very young age. And again, that temptation is there to steal someone else's attention.
Yeah. And it can become very voyeuristic, even without it moving into inappropriate media like pornography. That's a whole nother thing.
Right.
Just the bombardment of images, like you would never, most men would never go over to somebody's house with a pool and be like, oh, I like to watch her in her bathing suit. That you'd be weird, right?
Right.
But on social media, you can just scroll through and, oh, there they are in their family. Oh, they're all in swimsuits, or they're all in,
Mhm.
and again, I'm not saying it's wrong for a woman to wear a swimsuit. Do not hear me say something weird, but it can become weird the amount of images we
Mhm.
can flood our mind with, and what we can put out there,
Yeah.
which actually leads me to, in our remaining time, I just want to talk about a couple of the boundaries
Yeah.
with that kind of stuff that we can put up. How do I, my husband refers to this actually, and my question is how to become this. He calls it being a safe woman. He's like, there are women that I trust to be friends with. I feel like they are safe women. They do not pull from me. And he's like, likewise, he's like, I can feel it because we talk about this all the time.
Okay. Oh, this is interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
Tell me what.
we had this conversation a lot. And so he'll say, this person, when I'm around them, I feel like they need something from me. I feel like they're talking or they do something and she's looking at me. Am I reacting to her? Am I noticing her?
Hmm.
She, she needs me to somehow affirm her. And he can feel that need pull at him, that soliciting attention, pay attention to me, affirm me. And he said, I can feel that.
Yeah.
He's very discerning. And he's
Wow.
like, likewise, there are women that I feel like I can just relate to. It's healthy. We can be friends, and I don't feel like they are trying to divert any part of my attention or my affection from my wife to them.
Wow.
And likewise, I've had the conversation with another couple and a male friend, and he's a hugger, and he'll come up, be out, gives me a side hug every time he sees me. And it's 1,000% platonic. And yet he'll say, like, I won't hug her. And I'm like, oh, why? He's like, because she needs something from that hug. And I'm not hugging her. And so we have to understand that 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 heart of soliciting or adultery starts internally with taking something for identity. And I think that can translate into other boundaries real quick. Texting is the one maybe I wanted to unpack in a remaining moment. Private messaging. A few years ago, there was no such thing. And this woman would never just call my husband at home and be like, hey, let's talk. But somehow, because of texting and private messaging, we have the opportunity to communicate privately in a way that the phone doesn't ring. The spouse doesn't know that this person has texted you 3 times this week or whatever that is. And I think the heart of stewarding that attention and affection, being really careful about our connection.
Hmm.
Steward your communication and connection. There was a season of life, we were in ministry and busy, and you're texting a lot of people about a lot of things. But in recent years, my husband and I have just been like, you know what? We text in groups. If I have to text a man, I loop my husband into the text. If the man is married, I loop the man and the wife. She doesn't ever have to feel like, why is Julie texting my husband?
Mhm.
Or what's that? Because the privacy that texting affords, even if it's 100% appropriate, it affords a private connection to start growing on the side. And we have to guard our emotional connections
Mhm.
because, as we're going to unpack in the next episode, unchecked emotional connections can lead into compromising relationships.
It's so good, Julie. I feel like we could just sit and carry on for hours on this, but for now, we'll leave it there and we're going to pick back up on this topic of stewarding sexuality next week. We hope that this has just given you some things to chew on, to pray about, and to think about, and we'll meet you right back here next week.